Again, welcome to the EnRoads breakout session. EnRoads is a climate model tool that can be used as an effective teaching tool about worldwide effects of various public policies on climate change. And Rod Fisher will be our host for this session. He earned his PhD in chemical engineering from Iowa State, and then was on the faculty for 3 years at the University of Washington, and then worked for 18 years at Cargill, developing technology there. After retiring from Cargill, he spent 11 years teaching science at the International School of Minnesota, and then he retired a second time in 2018 to devote his energy to climate action. Since then, he's been an active member of the Eden Prairie chapter of CCL, and he has become a certified EnRoads ambassador. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Rod.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you everybody for having me and for joining. So, and I also need to thank the people that helped me get to where I am in the climate path, which some of you are here, including Scott, and some of you aren't, but I've had a lot of help getting along the way. This model is a great way to learn to talk about climate. And that's why I'm so excited about it. And that's why I'm excited that a big theme of this conference is building a bridge and finding ways to talk to each other, because I think this thing does it really well. There are experts on the Zoom screen right now that also know this thing. So if you have any ideas along the way, be sure and jump in, at least during the question time. So let me tell you what we're going to do. I'm giving you a talk about a talk so that you can be more empowered with EnRoads and hopefully walk away and say, hey, if I'm not using it or if I don't know how to use it, I'm interested to do that now. So 70%, as we know, of Americans support action on the climate, according to Yale Climate Survey. A third of them talk about it. I think it's a hard thing to talk about when you don't know how the other person feels. We just heard that in the last session. So demonstrating, what I've found is demonstrating with a model, this model at least, is less threatening. And it's an engaging way to get people to talk about it. And that's been a surprise to me. I thought it would be just a great way to be technical, because I'm a technical guy. But it actually is a way to bridge the divide. And I'm going to show you a lot of pictures of different EnRoads sessions I've done with different people. We'll talk about that. So I was doing CCL and EICDA, the bill talks, before EnRoads came out. I'd done about 8, mostly to Rotary groups. And Rotary groups are great because they're a very mixed audience. They have a kind of a formal structure. You get through your talk. And it was going fine, and they're very polite people. But then, as soon as EnRoads came out, I jumped on board. I trained. I became an ambassador, which basically means I trained. And then since then, I've done 18 presentations. And I tell you, from day one, from the first presentation, it was a wake up for the audience. Just an amazing switch from even for Rotary groups. I don't mean to disparage them, but for other groups, it was a turn from polite, okay, he did it, see ya, to we're engaged, we're participating, we have an idea about climate, and we get to test it. So that is just amazing. Every talk that I give ends up pointing toward carbon pricing, and you'll see, because carbon pricing is the most powerful thing that EnRoads can point to. It's not the only thing, and of course we don't say it's not the silver bullet, but it's one of many important bullets. And the differences with EnRoads, as I said, is our people are engaged, and that just has been great. And another bonus is it works great on Zoom. So I've been talking about it, most of those 18 presentations have been on Zoom, and it works great. So what I'm going to do is give you an example presentation which basically does this, and then we'll talk more about it. But the presentation, of course, does the main 6 things that we should do: who I am, how to talk about climate, and then I have to go in and talk about what is the EnRoads model and build confidence in it. Then we'll use the model, and we're going to do that today. And then we'll notice the power of pricing carbon, which points back to CCL, and then how you can get active. So this is generally what I do when I talk. So now we're in my talk. Okay, why am I here? I'm going to zoom. I'm going to quickly go through some of these parts because you guys are CCLers and you know the details. But I will give you a bit of my story. I came into climate because I was mad that people saw money as more important than the future of these 2 munchkins, my grandkids, or my kids, or nature, or your kids. They just saw money as more important, and they were prioritizing profit, mostly fossil fuel profit. And then I got mad that they were manipulating science in order to make that story, in order to tell that story. They were manipulating science, and I'm a scientist, so that really got me going. And then I got sad because I realized they were doing what every human does: take what's in your self-interest, manipulate the environment of knowledge, and sell that to people. And so I realized I can't just be mad. I have to get engaged in finding ways to reach people. And that's what I love about CCL. So I'm going to go a little quickly here because I want to spend more time on the model, but I talk about what we want, what we love, what we don't want, what we don't love, and then how to get there. And so I like this slide though, because it's the setting for the setup. Here's the atmosphere of the Earth all wrapped up into one ball, and it's really that thick, really a thin little thing. And here's the oceans and all the water of the Earth wrapped up into one ball. These are small compared to the Earth, so we can really do a job on them. And that job, of course, is warming, and that warming affects both the oceans and the atmosphere. And so I can talk about that. And always I customize my talks to whoever I'm talking to. The Nebraska group, I don't know if anyone's on from Nebraska, but they've been great about getting EnRoads in front of their Senator Sass, a couple congressmen. So I have a couple Nebraska slides that I stole from Climate Reality Project. And they happened to be Republicans. So of course I grabbed some Republican agenda items to talk about what were the Republicans saying, and we could talk about these things then. And then of course, get back to talking. This is the value. We got to learn to talk about climate. How are we going to talk about it? Let's talk about solutions. The business as usual is here, 6.4C or 6.4F, and the goal is 2 degrees C, 3.6F. This is where we got to get, folks, and how powerful. I always talk about the new economy and the jobs that it will bring, et cetera, et cetera. So now I get to introduce the model. And for those of you who don't know, the EnRoads model was built in order to allow guys like me or you to talk about climate modeling in a very friendly way to people that don't normally think about climate modeling. The model, of course, assesses all the greenhouse gases, and they come from energy, from land use, from CO2 removal, which we'll talk about, and then other greenhouse gases. Those affect temperature and impacts, right? That's simply what the model does. What's affecting these arrows, and how does that affect the globe? It is a global model. It's coming out of Climate Interactive. It's a group out of MIT Sloan. They're really good. It's global. It looks at the whole Earth. It can't give us details about North America versus Asia, et cetera. It calculates energy, economic, regulatory choices. It calculates results up to 2100 the year, so for this century. And there's lots of technical stuff we can talk about that I won't. But it is well aligned with all the models. So I do try to sell, and I'm selling to you, that this model is a legit model. It runs on my laptop, but it is a legitimate, lined with other climate models. So we can trust it. This is a bit more detail about how it works. Energy supply, energy demand, policy choices, economic performance, and then impacts, all right? Now, if I blew out all the details of the model, you would find 14,000 blue arrows like this, but I'm not gonna show you that, thank goodness. So let's go look at the model. This is where we get to jump right into playing with the model. So that's what we're gonna do. This is the live model. It is running on my laptop, and it's responding to changes that I can make. So I'll give you a little orientation. Up here are the global sources of energy that come into the global economy. They're coal, oil, gas, renewables, bioenergy, nuclear, and something called New Zero, which basically means new technology. This is about the amount of energy, and this is the year, all right? Over here, and I'm gonna leave these slides up, these two graphs are kind of our markers. This is the CO2 gases that come from that, plus the rest of the economy. So this energy gives most of the CO2 gas, or the warming gases, but there's other sources too, as you know, agriculture, melting permafrost, stuff like that. So CO2, fluorine gases, methane, and others. We're going to pay attention to CO2 and methane mostly. This is the temperature that we get by 2100. That should be 2. That should be 2 degrees if we're going to try to stick at least to the worst case of Paris Accord. And then down here, we talk about all the things we can do. We can affect coal, and we can highly tax it. So you're going to, when you play with this, you'll find out it's really simple. We can highly tax oil. We can affect nuclear. So here's the energy supply. Notice carbon price down there. We'll get to that. So we can affect the energy supply, and the people have designed it so that the full range of these sliders is the full practical range of policy choices that can be made. Practical meaning, in some of the cases, we can highly tax coal and basically, shut it down. Notice that here, coal keeps rising, and you're going to wonder, wait a minute, I thought coal was dead. Well, this is a global picture. Coal is a big, big deal in a lot of the world outside the US, Brazil, China, India. They have coal, they're going to burn coal. All right, there's energy supply. We can play with that. Here's transport, buildings, and growth. These are things that use energy and that we can affect. We can affect efficiency. Okay, we'll come back to that. We can electrify the transportation sector. Same with buildings and industry. We can affect population. I'm not sure how, but think about it. We can affect economic growth. And then over here are a couple other categories of land and industry emissions, and this is a great way to affect methane. And if we went, every one of these has levels of detail that I'm not going to play in much today, but we get in here and we can ask the question, what else is this category talking about besides cows? And it's talking about agriculture, natural gas drilling wastes, natural gas leaks around the sector. So there's methane and other things. Here's deforestation, here's afforestation, planting trees, and here's ways to remove carbon from the atmosphere, or at least from stack gas. So this is our playground, and it's, it's the things we can do. Now you, being part of my audience, get to tell me, how are we going to get that to 2 degrees C in about 10 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes of your work? So now we open it up and everybody gets to jump in and tell me, do something to coal, do something to electrification, do something to methane. Ready, set, go. push mute if you want to jump in with an idea. Pretty quiet.
Plant trees.
Plant trees, love it. Okay, so afforestation. This is timely because Republican, one of the things on that list was planting trees and a trillion tree initiative. So just watch, I did it. Look at the temperature. If I do that all the way to the right, that's pretty equivalent to a trillion trees. All the way to the left, business as usual. So this is what's going to happen if we don't do anything. I just planted a trillion trees. So
Rod, we're in the Midwest and we talk a lot about regenerative agriculture and cover crops. Where
beautiful.
can we find that in this model?
Good, I'll come to that. I want to just wrap up the idea on afforestation. It's not nothing, but it's not a big deal. And you want to play with it and see, what did it do? It affected CO2 because trees absorb CO2. So it did what we would expect, but it's not a big, strong thing. Okay, now we
Can I
are,
ask a real quick question? The numbers here, though, this is where we'll be at 2100.
yeah,
Okay, so okay, okay, and
Yep.
we want it to be at a
2.
maximum of 2, but
Yeah.
that's like also from what I heard, the Paris Climate Agreement is saying that that's actually not good enough, and the next session they want to bring it down even further.
yeah, originally they said 1.5, and I think we're going to blow right by 1.5, unfortunately. So people are now talking about 2.
Okay.
But I say 2 so we can make ourselves success in our short time together. Now, land use. Part of that has to do with methane release, agriculture. And we can look down here and see that there's some waste emissions. But the other part happens here when we talk about technological, and in this case, agricultural soil carbon sequestration. You see that? So, or agricultural soil carbon. That's the year that we start. Biochar is another way. Enhanced mineralization is another way. These are all things, but the main one people are talking about is soil sequestration, growing double crops, etc. I'm not going to go into the details of all of that, but we will turn that on. And we'll turn it on in a big way. Okay, so here's the change. All of these carbon renewal methods, if implemented, do this. They pull carbon down and they pull the temperature down. So we went from 3.5 to 3.1. Okay, so it did something. Give me another one.
Energy efficiency.
Yeah,
In
great.
building homes.
Oh man, this is like such low hanging fruit, and people will tell you that. So if we, even without changing the energy package of where the energy comes from, improve efficiency. And these paybacks are very, very quick. So I'm jamming them all the way to the right because we want to see, highly incented efficiency. This would be in automobiles. This is without any electrification, folks. So there we go. So we're comparing 3.1 if we just efficiently rebuild buildings, to 2.7 if we hit transportation, to 2.4. Huge, huge deal. Next one.
Electric cars.
Yeah. So notice the grid over here. The grid, what is over here putting electricity into the grid? What part of this mess of energy is used for electricity mostly? Coal, oil, gas, renewables, bioenergy.
All of it.
Well,
Yeah, not so much oil, not so much, a little bit of gas, but you're right. So coal, so there's a lot, I don't know, about a third of that is going into the grid. So let's use that and electrify automobiles. But look what happens. We
nothing.
just put a whole bunch of electricity into automobiles, but where did that electricity come from?
Coal.
Coal, gas.
But
Oil.
We don't yet have a really big green renewables there, but
Yeah.
still, it's an important use of the green energy that we do have.
But what if you move the coal down so that we're not getting that electricity from coal? Would that help by electrifying cars?
There it is. That's what you just talked about. Coal is by far the dirtiest energy we have out there. If we could highly tax it, convince those countries to not dig their coal and burn it, then you would get there. And if we're playing with that, let's play with oil too.
Mhm. And then move over renewables.
Yeah, now, and you want to bonus renewables, right? So now we've got, well, we hit our target for one thing.
Wow.
And that's because we've really pounded on fossil energy. We've really rewarded renewables, and we've hit efficiency and electrification, plus technological uses of carbon removal.
I got a question on energy efficiency in buildings.
Good.
Are you talking about building new buildings that are energy efficient or rehabbing old buildings?
Both, but most of the buildings that exist are going to be here for 30 more years, so it's rehabbing is a big part of that. It's expensive, but the payback is still there. Good question.
Rod, could you
Yeah.
tell us again how, for example, piggybacking on the last woman's question, if I want to know exactly what does this mean, energy efficiency in buildings and industry, how do I find that info?
Yes, so you click into this and it goes deeper, both in terms of a quick description, and then over here we can get information. So there's just scads of information here about what these mean. We can graph different aspects of that, how it plays. And in some of them, you can go in and do detailed changes into what policy you want to test.
So this is a good place to flesh out some of the specific policies we might encourage our legislators and members of Congress to pursue if this is an area of interest for them.
Exactly. And so when I'm presenting, especially when I just have a few minutes, I tell people the depth of knowledge behind all of these and the different ways that we can present all of these is just, you're seeing a thin slice, but it's the slice that, demonstrates the power. And then there's always deep power beneath it too. I want to bring your attention over here. These are the CO2 warming, the global warming gases. We've done a pretty good job of hitting CO2. What have we done for methane?
Nothing.
Not a lot. So,
I mean, that blue looks about the same to me.
yeah. So this would be another area where we could work on methane. And again, methane is not just cows, it's leaks from wells, there are agricultural practices that can work on methane. So methane is a very strong lever here.
I read a really interesting article about bogs, peat bogs.
Yeah. This model doesn't yet cover them.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, because it's not yet modeled well. There's not a lot of agreement. So I'm going to call methane a little bit done, and I'm going to say you guys are awesome. Okay, so what I do when I present this is we spend the time here so people can get their hands dirty playing with things and seeing what is strong and what isn't. And then I do this because because none of you mentioned carbon pricing. I'm just surprised.
We're playing devil's advocate.
You guys work for CCL and you didn't mention carbon pricing.
That's because we're showing how little you can get done, but then carbon price does all of this. But
yeah. So then I show it. And I could just put this lever over, but that lever is not CCL. What I do is I go in and build our bill. And so we start at $15. I'm going to start at 2025 to be a little pessimistic. That starts the first year. The final carbon price, you add $10 a year for 75 years plus 15 is 765. That's the final carbon price if we take it out to the end of the century. But we want to start that final ramp at 2026, the next year. And it's going to take 75 years. And so the ramp looks like this. That's our ramp. That's the predictable ramp that the business can and financial markets can grow around. And so we went from what was the original?
3.6.
3.6 to 2.7 with one thing. We also then went from, we went from this on the energy side with all these fossil driven energy sources there to this, driving them down. We did this on the emissions side, which drove it down. We didn't do anything on methane, right? So our bill doesn't do anything on methane. That's fine. There can be other ways to deal with methane. But this is my transition then to say, this is what we can do with one act. And now let's go talk about that act. So then I jump back.
So quick question. So using the carbon tax, the reason we want to do it is that it will make economic sense to get away from fossil fuels. So when we apply that, will it naturally, does the grid actually lower the amount of coal being used and stuff like that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I say, congratulations, we just saved the world. However, it's not saved until we actually make some action happen. And so pricing carbon is the action that I believe we should follow. I don't need to tell you guys the CCL story. Here's the Industrial Revolution. It worked well for 150 years. Let's go do something new. And then I can talk about externalities, but I won't do that with you guys. You're smart. And then I talk about the bill. I don't need to do that with you. You're smart. I talk about what the bill does back to that 2.7 on its own, one thing. And in fact, it is a bill. It's been submitted, it's been written, it's been negotiated. So I try to drive that this action is close. And so with groups, I talk about all the benefits that you guys have seen and all the people endorsing it. And finally, then, how do you help? So that bill's out there. What should you, Rotary member or member of a church group, do to help? And of course, the thing you should do is jump in and become a lobbyist like we are. So I talk about lobbying and how fun it is and how empowering it is. And then I talk about how you, audience, can join the party to participate in the future. And that part of it is creating conversations and becoming a citizen lobbyist. And also part of it is education. So I reemphasize, go open up this model. It's free, it's one click away, and you can play with it and become more knowledgeable. So then I end up with CCL vision, which I really love. When we get this done, it will be a win-win-win. Less climate stress, a new economy, and people who believe in government, which to me is a win. So that's the end of my talk. What I want to say to you guys as CCLers, finally to wrap up this session, is I've used it in all kinds of sessions. The easiest group is my local CCL chapter. They're friendly. And they like the experience of testing it. So similar to what we just did, you and I. I like small groups of just curious folks, and I've tripped across groups even at retirement homes. A bunch of old guys have coffee and they want to talk about things. So I'll come in and talk to them. Rotary, I've mentioned, they're great. They're always looking for speakers. High school, college students, I've talked to groups like that, little, whether it be a class or an environmental club. A lot of these groups are 10, 5, 8 people sitting around, and they're just really, really effective. Church groups, specialty clubs like Master Naturalists. But the most, I hope, the most powerful is when I get dragged into, invited in to talk to members of Congress and their staff. And here it's one-on-one, one-on-three, talking about this model. And here's, I think this guy's, anybody from Nebraska here? I think he's a staffer for Ben Sass. For Ben Sass, senator from Nebraska. Good guy. We sat and talked, walked it through him. And I hope, you know, I don't know, but he was engaged, and I hope he walked away and said, oh, okay, there is a legitimate way to talk about some of these ideas, and we shouldn't spend our time talking about 1 trillion trees if that gets us 0.1 degrees off the ticket.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So we're trying to work to have a meeting like you're talking about with Betty McCollum's staff.
Good, yeah.
Because she does a lot of things about climate, but hasn't necessarily done the one thing we want her to do.
Yeah.
But we thought it'd be a perfect opportunity at this time to just get whatever number of her staff can show up, or her, to just hear them talk about the direction of their policies, and we can show them how carbon pricing is a great way to make the other things work better.
Yeah.
So we finally, I think, gotten to the point where we can make that happen, although we're a little nervous about it. So when you did that with SAS, did you, how did you, was there a special orientation you wanted to provide about
well,
the
that's
model?
only that, you know, I sold it and pitched it as, I'm here to help you with a tool that I think is legit and accurate and powerful. And this tool you can go off and use. I'll be happy to use it for you. So I tried to just say, I'm here as a resource to you. What do you want to, you know, and so I had to describe the tool, and that's the important part, is convincing people that the tool is legitimate. And then say, what should we try out? And of course, you know, we bounced around, and I suggested some of the mainstream ideas that the Republican Party has tried, and we saw, and he goes, oh, that's not big. And so that was it. It was mostly, I'm here to help. We're here to test these ideas. And that's why I like this opening session today. You know, a lot of it was listening. Well, this to me, EnRoads has been an important listening tool, because I say, here's the tool. What do you want to talk about? But let's talk about it in a way that is focused on mitigation strategies, because nobody's going to argue we shouldn't mitigate. So what do you want to talk about? And people can throw them in. We listen. I listen. I try it out. The model is pretty, you know, non-confrontational. It just says, well, you got 0.1 degrees. And people don't get upset about that. They just go, oh, shoot. So that's mainly how I sell it, Bonnie, is a listening. And you know, I'm here to help.
Yeah.
Hey, Rod?
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions, but one of them is, it has to do with how the tool was first made and who made it.
Yeah.
And then what I'm thinking of is, if you go to give a talk, does anybody ever ask you, where did this model come from? And did CCL, is it designed for CCL just to promote CCL's agenda?
Yeah, that's, you know, that's a good point. And often I do mention that it's completely independent of CCL. It's not lucky coincidence that they point in the same direction. It's the facts, but they are independent. They come out of MIT Sloan School, which is a business school. Their little center is devoted to making complex systems, which are dynamic, meaning they move with time, making complex systems understandable to business leaders, to policymakers, to anybody. So they then did that for climate modeling, and they've been doing it for 10 or 15 years. So, you know, I always drop that this is MIT and it's a business school. It's not just a bunch of, you know, eggheads who like to watch numbers. They're trying to help us make decisions with the tool.
Rob, great presentation, wonderful tool. I think I missed this, but can I walk you back? You briefly mentioned regenerative agriculture, and I'm trying to remember where that was in the model.
Yeah, so it is, okay, well, I have to stop and reshare, don't I? And I'll do that so we can go look at it. It is down here under technological, actually, carbon removal, ways to remove carbon. And it includes a bunch of them, including agricultural soil carbon sequestration.
Got it.
So Regen Ag, and you could go in there and tweak those numbers individually. I think you can turn it on, and then you can go off and, how much do you want to do, percent of max potential? Let's just say we took all of the soil that is potentially double cropped or used some sort of sequestration. And let's say we started that, well, next year, what the heck? Net carbon dioxide removal, okay? And what did we do to, now this only shows 0.2 degrees C, and I still need to have a discussion with EnRoads people, because that is weaker than I'm reading elsewhere. But that's just one thing, and I don't know, we could go here, look at this, I could touch this, and it talks about total increase, so it goes into some detail. I could go over here and get more detail. But that's on me. I need to learn better why that effect seems weaker than what I'm hearing out there in the literature. So there's always something to learn. This drives it. Other questions? We've got a few minutes, right? What do we have? 5 minutes left, Scott?
Yeah, we've got 7 minutes left.
Okay.
Ron, can I ask you a question about nuclear?
Yeah.
I see that as part of your chart. Since it appears the Biden climate plan is going to have significant investment in the new generation modular
Yes.
nuclear.
Yes.
Since the carbon pricing increases the price of carbon sources, would we assume that nuclear will be more competitive and that we'll be encouraging more nuclear as well?
Well, the results of those policies is anybody's guess, but this model can account for that. But this nuclear slider is for old nuclear. And everybody that I can talk to says old nuclear is as expensive because it's so big and it's top heavy with, safety issues. So that's what this one, but new nuclear is part of new zero carbon. And this could include fusion or thorium-based fission, new fission, smaller plants, et cetera. So the model does allow that. And if we just, for instance, go back to square one and say, what happens if we just turn on all zero carbon with huge breakthroughs? Well, first you notice a breakthrough today means it takes a few years to get commercialized, which is understandable. And then it has that kind of effect. But yes, the details are down in here. And nuclear is not something that that they're running away from. They have no policy choice biases about nuclear. They just say you can do it, but they broke it down, fortunately, into two categories. Originally, it was all lumped, and old nuclear. You can even highly subsidized old nuclear. Let's do that. Highly subsidized old nuclear, so it's basically free, and it's still people aren't going to build those plants. They're too expensive.
So a follow-up to that, obviously we don't want to, if we do away with the old nuclear, we don't want to put that into carbon-based fuels.
Exactly, very good.
Right. We want to put it in renewables.
Right, so good point. If I did that right now, nuclear is not a huge part of the grid, especially worldwide. But if you look at that energy and I knock out nuclear, old nuclear, you are seeing a growth in the fossil because they have to make up the difference.
Right.
And we don't want to do that. I am an advocate of keeping current plants running, but don't build any new old nuclear plants. That's good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Are battery improvements under renewables?
Oh, excellent, excellent. Yes. Because taking advantage of the renewables that are out there, and I don't think they're under here explicitly. Well, yeah, there they are. Storage cost. There you go. So, you know, we can store with lithium now. It's expensive, but they're trying to break that down and make progress. So when will that thing happen? 2030, 2050, we hope earlier. And what will the cost reduction of battery storage do? So if battery storage comes up and we do have you know, a lot of renewable breakthroughs, we can have a big impact. So that's accountable through the model.
See, Rod,
Yeah, Peter.
I got a question about the, you know, you on the left, the global, that's the global sources of energy.
Yep.
And then on the right, that must be the global emissions.
Yep.
So I'm curious, and to use electrification and transportation as an example,
yep.
when you slide that button back and forth, that's assuming that all of the vehicles in the whole world are becoming electric vehicles?
No, it's incentivizing their development and their sale, whether it be through taxes or regulatory means. But no, it accepts the fact that somebody's got a car, they're going to drive that car into the ground probably. Now, some of those incentives could be we're going to buy old cars and sell them for scrap, but it does not. And you know, so if you go into the detail, you can find that out.
But it's a global.
It's a global.
Everything is global on this.
Yeah. So that's an important point that I want to make. Is that's the biggest pushback I get when I present. Is this is global? What do we have to say about what China does or what India does? And I say, well, we happen to be, you know, the world's leading economy. We happen to be the most influential financial market, and we happen to be the technology leader in the world. Plus, and then you get to talk about the border adjustment. The border adjustment of this new bill says, China, if you don't do this to some degree, then your products at our border are going to get taxed. Same with other countries. So it's a nice entree, but you're right. It's a global view.
Rod, we have 2 minutes left. I have a quick question, I think.
Okay.
Could you talk a little, this has been really interesting and there've been great questions.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the training in case any of these people are interested?
Yeah, great question. So Climate Interactive runs the EnRoads. This is that group down there. I think, Scott, you were going to put it in the chat, a link to them, but you can just Google it. The training is 8 one-hour videos. They're really well done. It's a top-notch group. And those videos, you know, they're playing with the model. You're playing with the model while they're talking, so you learn a lot. And then you are, you know, you're definitely capable at that point to go out and use the model. That's when I started. And then there's this ambassador program where they say, if you use the model and you get a little feedback from some friendly group, and I used my CCL chapter, and then you go present to 1 or 2 groups, you can tell us, and then we'll sign you up as an ambassador. What's that mean? That means you might get a call out of the blue and say, hey, would you talk EnRoads to our little group? And you can say yes or no. But the training is great. It really upped my game in understanding the whole panoply of things, not just carbon pricing, you know, which I felt pretty good about. So
free?
Oh yeah, it's free. Oh yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I really encourage it. It's been just a night and day thing for me. Even
you're saying that, Ron, you're saying that you feel like your presentations to SAS and folks like that are substantially more influential and you're having better rapport with those folks than you did without this?
Yeah. Well, in fact, in some of those, I wouldn't have been invited into the Nebraska. They invited me because I can talk EnRoads, but yeah, everybody, there have been so many members of Congress or their staff saying, hey, we've heard about EnRoads, or we saw it on the Hill. They've been on the Hill presenting to staff and members, that they want to go into detail. They see it as a tool to help them in the discussion.
So I want to jump in here because we're now about a minute over time. Great presentation. Thanks very much. And Rod's contact and also other stuff I put into the chat so that you can follow up with him if you have other questions. So I guess I will just say that concludes this particular session. Don't go anywhere. One of the great things about Rod's presentation is that this is the same Zoom line that will continue the rest of the conference for us. So you don't actually have to sign off from this. So thanks very much.